or so someone else on that computer there got it.
That's supposed to be
Just
there.
okay. So little background about me is that Zionism is, I'm not going to say expertise because it's only a master's degree, but I wrote my master's thesis on Zionism, specifically about the reform movement and Zionism. So maybe we'll talk about that a bit tonight. But before we begin, tonight we're going to read some of the foundational texts of what Zionism is from over 100 years ago, or most of them are from over 100 years ago. But I also want to get to, I'll try to, especially next week, get to things that you want to know. So I'll start this out by saying it will be history. I'll give a little bit of history about the state of Israel. Tonight we're talking about pre-state of Israel, but it's mainly going to be a text study class because that's really what I love to do or I love to teach. But I will try to weave in your questions through texts and contextualize the text too. But before we begin, are there questions that you want to explore about Zionism? Online too, online or here.
Well, actually, was it Herzl? I see it over there. Was it
Herzl? Yeah, we'll talk about Herzl.
I think the overwhelming question, and the one that's coming up now virtually every day, all day on the news and everywhere, is what is the distinction between Zionism and Judaism?
Okay.
And the question, if you are anti-Zionist, can you be anti-Zionist and not be anti-Semitic? Where are those?
Good.
Where are all of those places, things crossing? And I think we're all seeing it constantly now.
Very nice.
But I think that's an overwhelming question for a lot of us.
Good. We'll begin to touch on that tonight, and then definitely bring it up at the end of next week. Okay. Thank you. Tanya.
I'm curious what the story is with those rabbis and the Orthodox Jewish people who are anti-Zionist.
Anti-Zionist. The Neturei Karta is who you're talking about mainly. Also Satmar, but definitely Neturei Karta. So we will talk. We'll talk about early.
What is that about?
We'll talk about early anti-Zionism tonight, and that's where they come from also. But yeah, I'll get to the roots of that tonight. Good. Other questions? Yes.
I think Zionism.
Hold on one second online. I'm turning here. Lisa, right? Yes. Great. Thank you.
I'm curious to understand what in our history or what has caused Zionism to become so stigmatized.
Zionism stigma. Okay, so good. Okay, online, someone had a question.
Zionism seems to have developed a very negative connotation, which I don't think is correct. To me, Zionism is the fact that the Jewish people need to have a homeland, and I don't understand how that could turn into a negative connotation.
Good. We will definitely touch on that tonight. See where the roots of that are. Good. Any other questions before we jump in? And when you have other questions that come up, you ask me. But
I would like to know maybe the difference between a refugee, an immigrant, and a settler.
Okay. So refugee, immigrant, and settler. Okay. So that's a little bit of an international law question, but I'll think about it for next week. Okay.
Like the textbook definition.
So I'll think about it for next week. But we will talk tonight about ideas of colonialism. Okay?
Yes, I was just going to say that Cantor was talking about colonialism and that how that really is not true because we were here, they were there.
Well, maybe we'll talk about it. Okay, because we'll see the early Zionists used the word that they were colonialists, right? Okay, so that's not so easy for us, but we're going to struggle with these texts.
Except words' meaning do change.
Exactly, 100%. So we're going to see that. Okay, good. All right. Here, everybody take one, pass it around. I'm gonna give this first before we look at text. I need to talk a little bit, but I'm gonna ask you all a question first. And this might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, but it's going to be very important. The question is, what is a Jew? What is a Jew?
Yes, you are.
I had to answer this
Good.
when I went through
Meg.
conversion.
Okay, so Meg has an answer that she had to
I
know.
think it's basically living as a Jew.
Living as a Jew, but okay, can you define a word using the same word? Well, I'm
Right.
joking, but what does it mean to live as, okay, but what does it mean to live as a Jew? So,
Identifying as a Jew.
identifying,
Practicing.
okay.
It
but-
doesn't mean you have to be Orthodox. but
Okay, so now you're throwing in kind of some kind of religious
Well, there
dogma.
is a technical,
So is there a technical?
well,
Hold
isn't
on.
it if you're born of a Jewish mother?
Okay, if you're born,
Isn't that,
so that's a Jewish legal definition from ancient times, born of a Jewish mother. Okay, so that means, but does that mean like, someone who happened to have been born in a Jewish uterus and gets kidnapped when they're a baby and grown up in Papua New Guinea, are they a Jew? I don't know. Okay.
Well,
Madeleine
that's the
Albright,
question.
Yeah,
Jew.
Madeleine
I'm
Albright.
gonna
Yeah.
go with the
Ask the
definition of porn.
person.
What's that?
I'm gonna go with the definition of porn.
Okay, definition of porn, you know when you
When I
see it.
see it, but
That was from the Supreme Court.
Right,
in the
but
50s
I'm
and
gonna
60s,
go,
right?
but I'm gonna go with, for me, it's when if you hear the word Jew and you think, that's me.
Okay,
And that's
interesting.
a subjective kind of thing.
Okay, Matt.
A person who lives with the title of Jewish person and accepts everything that entails, along with,
But what does that entail?
wearing that when everybody else is, seeing and thinking things.
All right, but so it's interesting, you're all giving kind of subjective
Right.
definitions, right? Something that I feel, this is me, like, okay, Scott, you got,
I was gonna say,
except, sorry, Beth gave a Jewish legal definition, but everybody else is kind of subjective, right?
could it be that the Jew does not believe that Jesus was the Messiah?
Doesn't believe that Jesus was Messiah, but Muslims don't believe that too.
I know,
Neither do
but-
Hindus, neither do, okay.
Neither do
So,
Baha'i,
so Scott, you're defining from the negative, okay? Now, Lisa, yeah.
Could it be, well, the traditions we all share that we practice together?
Okay, so that's it. That's interesting because my brother-in-law hates practice. Sorry, my mother-in-law is on the on here, but I'm just using him as a silly example, which is not really true, but doesn't care about traditions at practicing. Yeah, so there, okay, so
When I hear the word Spanish,
Yeah.
I don't even know what it means because I didn't study Hebrew.
yeah, it's not even in Hebrew.
It gets inside me
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I feel it.
okay, but like, all right, but that could be very moving to a nice Christian person too. I don't know. So, okay, because why am I asking this question? What is a Jew?
Yeah, what's that got to do with Zion?
What does that got to do with Zion? Well, okay,
that's
so
the question.
so now,
One question of this.
okay, so here we go.
Everything to do with it.
Oh, everything to do. Okay. So maybe,
Not necessarily.
but let's now get a history lesson. Okay. Right. So, and I'm using Europe first because most of the Zionist thinkers came from Europe. Okay. So, what was the situation of the Jew in medieval Europe?
They were another persecuted, remember the Inquisition?
Persecuted, sure. Inquisition was in Spain and then went to other places, right? Okay, good. Ghettoized, or right. So okay, so outcast, right?
Expelled.
So could be expelled, yeah. Barbara.
They weren't citizens.
They weren't citizens. There was no such thing as citizens.
Not
In-
landowners.
Right, they were not landowners. There was no such thing as citizenship in medieval Europe, right? So they were princes or kings or counts or whoever, and they had a territory that they owned, and they were subjects, right? And you were not an individual citizen with individual rights, you as a Jew or you as a non-Jew, right? Jews were protected by the prince or the count or whoever ruled that area. They could decide one day to kick them out, take their money, whatever. They were often protected, right? Jews as a collective were a collective. Jews lived in semi-autonomous communities in Europe that had their own laws, had their own courts, had their own leaders, the rabbis, right? The rabbis had the power of punishment towards the people. I could fine you, I could flog you, I could, right, if for not celebrating Shabbat or whatever, right? Okay, so Jews were semi-autonomous, and in some places they lived in neighborhoods called ghettos, which came from Venice first, that word. In some places they would lock the gate at night, the non-Jews would lock the gate at night, but it was always at least a virtual ghetto, meaning they lived together. There were Jews who did business with non-Jews, but there was no, you didn't hang out, right? I mean, maybe some people did, but like, not.
Couldn't join a
but-
guild.
But you couldn't join a guild, and you had your own laws, right? You were a people who saw yourself as a people. The Jew in medieval Germany saw himself related to the Jew in medieval Poland, saw themselves related to the Jew in medieval Morocco, and they were not related. I don't mean blood, not related to the outside world, right? They were part of a nation, what we call Am Yisrael, right? Nation's a modern word, but Am Yisrael, part of the people of Israel, right? Okay. What happened in 1789 in Paris?
French Revolution.
Well, what happened first?
Revolution.
There was a revolution, right? And then it was very chaotic, right? And eventually Napoleon, started conquering Europe, right? And he started tearing down the gates of the ghettos. But even before that, during the French Revolution, they had a debate in the French Assembly. Is a Jew a man? What does that mean? So if in this new French Republic, individuals are citizens, not subjects of the king, are citizens who have individual rights, can a Jew have individual rights? That's what they're debating. Is a Jew a man? That was the name of the speech, right? So
At first the Sephardics were allowed, but.
yeah, in Paris, because the Ashkenazi Jews were poorer,
Right.
they lived in the eastern
And they
part of, in
did
the borders
assimilate
between
as
the
well.
borders between
Right.
France and Germany. They didn't even speak French, they spoke Yiddish, while the Sephardic Jews in Paris and bigger cities might have already spoken French, right? Okay, so the question is, can a Jew be a citizen? So what now? You're living, the medieval world is coming apart, right? This is a very simple history. The medieval world's coming apart. Citizenship becomes an idea when Napoleon is conquering parts of German-speaking lands. There was no one country called Germany. The German-speaking lands where there were more Jews than in France. Can a Jew be a citizen? Why is that even a question? Why is it a question? Matthew.
Because up until that point, both the idea of including Jews and citizenship didn't really exist.
Right, but why? Speak against the Jews. Why can't the Jews be a citizen?
Why are they not human or something?
Well, okay, so you could have, so first you have the religious idea that they were the Christ killers. No, first you have the religious idea that they're Christ killers. The non-human idea didn't come later till 19th, 20th century with the Nazis, right? But this is starting here. Like there's roots of it in the church. First, they're cursed. It's more of it because they're the Christ killers. They're cursed. Okay, but we're creating a secular republic here in France. So should that be an argument anymore that they're not
looked
Christian?
upon as a threat to the church.
Right, but
the
we're not
Catholic Church was the
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, but that's not the case anymore after the revolution, right?
No.
They were loyal to their religion over.
Right. They have their own laws, and they're loyal to their laws. They're not loyal to the laws of the French state. Or they are loyal to their greater people. They're not loyal to the citizens here because the Jews are transnational, right? Okay.
Were they looked upon as a threat to the church, though?
But we're not talking about the church
No, they
anymore,
were looked
right?
at-
The French overthrew the church, right? The French Revolution overthrew the church. They're not allowing the church to make the definition anymore. Now it's the secular state, right?
Robert, maybe I'm just borrowing, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Barbara. Okay, 10, go.
Okay, I like what you said, I understand that. What popped to my mind first, what happened in America where people who were not landed were not citizens, but that does not seem to be the case.
That changed quickly in America, and it was a little more complicated than this, but as soon as basically from early America, Jews were citizens.
Yeah.
Because they were white.
Yeah.
They became white in America, right? But in Europe, they were not, there wasn't white and black in Europe at the time. Hold on one second. So I gotta keep moving. Yeah.
There was a way in which, even though they were living there.
Yeah.
It was more than just the legal status.
Right.
They were still not considered German. They
Right.
were not
Well,
considered.
but that's ideologically they were, according to the French, because we're all citizens, but in their hearts they weren't. And that, we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah.
Large.
Yeah, yeah,
Why not make them a citizen
Yeah.
or say, because they're not part of us?
right, right.
You
But
know,
but Napoleon did decide to make them citizens,
Yes.
right? Eventually, the Napoleonic states in Europe fell, and some places, some German-speaking places, took away citizenship. But eventually, throughout the 19th century, Jews were becoming citizens in German-speaking lands. We're not talking about Eastern Europe, right? But in Central Europe, Jews were becoming citizens.
How about in England?
England also, yeah, yeah. England also, probably earlier. I don't know enough about England, but Jews were becoming citizens in England.
Cromwell. when they
Cromwell allowed the Jews to come back.
Come back.
But
and
the-
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he established citizenship. I
Gotcha,
don't know.
gotcha. And a Jew became the prime minister in 19th century in England. He was converted to Christianity, but he became a prime minister. Right,
Yes.
Disraeli,
Yes,
Benjamin
yes,
Disraeli.
yes.
Right. So England's a little bit different, but okay, so this is called the process of emancipation for Jews, right? Okay, becoming citizenship. Now we have, though, what I was asking you, though, is called the Jewish question in Europe. That's what Europeans call the Jewish question. Can Jews be citizens? Okay. Once Jews were emancipated throughout Central Europe, Central and Western Europe, then what did that mean? I mean, Jews could get any kind of job they want, or Jewish men, right? You get any kinds of job they want. You could go to university, right? You can join the civil service. You can, if your country was slowly becoming democratic, which took a very long time, you may even be able to be elected to the parliament.
Could you own land?
Yeah,
Yes, before
You could not.
you cannot, Jews could not
Right,
own land,
right.
right? Owning land, yes, 100%. So, but the Jewish question always was there. Are the Jews really us? Right? What to do with the Jews? Okay, fast forward. You with me?
Yeah.
Fast forward to the 1890s.
Dreyfus.
Right. There was a French army officer who was accused of spying for the Prussians. Right? Prussia was a precursor state to Germany, where Berlin is, right? Accused of spying for the Prussians. He was put on trial and marches through Paris saying death to the Jews. Not just death to Dreyfus, death to the Jews. Paris, the place where the revolution started, right? Okay. Can the Jews be citizens? That's the question. So let's backtrack a little bit. Let's talk about some responses to emancipation. Okay. Different responses. The ghetto walls open up. What do you do? Either literally or virtually, what do you do? You leave. Ah. I could speak German now. I could get a job. I could go to university. Great. People fled the ghettos.
I could open a business.
I could open all kinds of businesses.
And have others besides Jews.
Yeah.
Patronize that business.
I can, yeah. And so people fled what does it mean for Judaism? So I asked, what is a Jew? But what is Judaism?
Well, it was the beginning of the reform movement.
Yeah, right. I'll get that in a second. But what is Judaism? Judaism is the way of life of the Jewish people, right? We've already said that the Jews are a people, right? Exile, our stories say exiled from our land, it might have been 1,800 years ago, right? Yeah.
Which countries were not part of this movement?
And
When you said Eastern Europe,
right, so
Czechoslovakia?
it depends. Czechoslovakia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Jews became citizens of the Austro-Hungarian
Yeah, they
Empire
really weren't
eventually.
countries
So Eastern Europe, I mean, what was in the Russian Empire?
Oh.
Jews were not emancipated in the Russian Empire until the communists. But the communists took away Judaism, so that was a different story.
They were
Right.
part of this
So
story
just-
that you're talking about.
Yes, they are part of
Yeah.
yes, so think of the famous Czechoslovakian Jew, Kafka, right? He grew up speaking German because he was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He went to university, Franz Kafka, went to university, right? So yeah. Okay, so but what are the responses to emancipation? what does it mean for Judaism?
I think it starts assimilation.
So assimilation. So assimilation means you shed your Judaism because assimilation means to shed your Judaism because so even though you're a citizen, there's still some, anti-Semitic, you can't get all the best jobs, you can't get into the best schools, you can't marry the whoever you want, the girl next door. So, what do? You go and get baptized because whatever, right?
Oh.
Yeah, people were doing
Was
that.
that the,
People were doing that.
is there a famous
So they,
letters?
Oh, that Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wrote
Yeah,
a
that was-
work called 19 Letters. We'll talk about that.
We're gonna talk
Okay, or kind of. So, okay, but that's one extreme. What else can you do? So here's now the Reform movement, which became German Judaism pretty much, right? Okay, we're part of the European culture now. Why doesn't our music sound like Beethoven? Right?
Yeah.
Listen to the Kiddush that we sing Friday night, the classical Reform tune, sounds like Beethoven. Right? Okay. Why can't, so that's one part of Reform is to modernize music with bringing organs, right?
Choir.
Mixed choirs too, right?
Right?
But then also we're going to university and we're learning about history, and we now can realize that the Jewish religion has evolved, and that the Bible might have even been written by many people over many periods of time.
Right.
So we can see that Judaism has changed. Why can't we change it to meet the needs of the time, right? That's Reform movement. Let's talk about another extreme. Okay, the ghetto walls have opened. What do? We retreat into the ghetto, stay in the self-imposed ghetto. That's where ultra-Orthodoxy comes from. Okay. Now, then there were shades in between too. What's become the conservative movement and what's become the modern Orthodox, right? That it's coming out of this process. Okay. Now,
But that's a really good point, Robert, just the fact that all strains of Judaism that we have today
Come from
are
Europe.
about 100 years old.
no, 200 years old.
200 years old, right, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're not, it's
Right.
no, that's not.
There was no such thing as Orthodoxy until there was
Right,
other
exactly.
ways of thinking about it, right? Yeah.
Until it
But
was
Rabbi, I have a question. How is that
Yeah.
different in America when you have the different ethnic groups, Polish, Irish, etc., want to live amongst their own kind?
Right. What was different in America, though, is always the idea of citizenship.
Mhm.
Right. That's what's different in America. And what's different in America is freedom of religion, which they did not have in Europe. In Europe, in Germany, even today in Germany, you paid your religious tax to the government. Once these German states became modernized and things like that, you paid your religious tax to the government, and then the government gave it back to the religious communities. And the government supports the synagogues and pays the rabbis. The community could donate more money to make it nicer, but you had to be, nowadays you don't have to be part of a religion, but you had to be part of a religion, right? Now, that brings up something else.
Well,
that
the whole
emancipation-
concept of the founding fathers was the whole idea of the separation of
Yeah,
church and
exactly,
state. And
Exactly. So that brings up another concept, though. We're getting to Zionism, don't worry. That brings up another concept, though, that Judaism is a religion. If I can be a German citizen, or if I could be a Prussian citizen or Bavarian citizen or a citizen of Saxony or all these German states that eventually became one country, if I could be a citizen, is Judaism now a nation? Or is it a religion, or am I a German of the Jewish religion? Right? I'm allowed to be a German of the Jewish religion. That was the prevailing idea. Okay. Now, does that make sense? You with me? Okay. So now let's go back forward in the 1890s, Dreyfus.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah,
Was
please.
that then a novelty, the notion that it was a religion separate from some kind of ethnic identity?
Yes, so
that was
ethnic
new.
identity is a new word they wouldn't have used.
Right,
Religion is a new word that Jews would have used. There's no word for religion in classical Hebrew.
Oh, interesting.
There's no word. The word we use in Hebrew today, dat,
Yeah, what does that mean?
which in classical Hebrew means law.
Oh,
Right? So there was no word for religion in classical Hebrew. In the Bible, there's no such thing as religion. It is this people has this God and this people have this God, right? And the Israelites would have said, those people don't have any gods and we have a God, right? Okay. So the idea of Judaism as a religion makes sense now, right? Does that, you see what I'm saying? Okay, so now fast forward in the 1890s, in Paris, they're calling for death to the Jews. Okay. Did emancipation work?
Apparently not.
Apparently, maybe not. There's still anti-Semites in Berlin and Vienna. Right? We're citizens and yet we're hated. Okay. In Eastern Europe, right, in the 1880s, in the early 1900s, there's government-sponsored pogroms, right? But in Central Europe, there's still hatred. What's that?
That's why I'm in America, maybe many of you are. too.
Yeah,
Doesn't
in the
matter.
right. Well, most people yes, most of your parents or grandparents probably came to America in the 1880s through the 1920s because they heard of pogroms. Most of them didn't experience pogroms, but it was mainly because Eastern Europe, they were very, very, very poor.
Yeah.
And they came to America because there was open immigration.
They also went to South Africa and.
And that is not,
and
the
South
2 million
America.
people came to America, not South, very tiny numbers. We'll talk about the people going to Palestine soon. Okay. Okay. Now, did emancipation work? The only way to really, some Jews started thinking the only way really to be accepted is to become a Christian, if so, right? Now, there were people in different parts of Europe who were talking about in the 19th century a return to the land of Israel, right? 19th century Europe was the time of nationalism, where people who speak the same language wanted their own political unit, right? That it wasn't until World War I, after World War I, when the Austrian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had, I don't know how many languages there were there. And a lot of the people after that got their own countries, right? Italy in the mid-19th century became one country. We all speak Italian, we are a nationality, this idea.
It
right?
also had to do with the evolution of the printing press and
For sure, but
people's
that's
ability to
100
read so
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
could
yeah.
communicate.
Yes. I'm trying to shorten things.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll shut up.
The idea of nationalism. So in the 19th century, there were also Jews who were starting to think about a return to the land of Israel. Okay. And so eventually one of these groups was called Chibat Zion, the lovers of Zion. Zion is a word that means, sometimes it means Jerusalem, sometimes it means all of the land. Started to set up farming colonies. Different people started writing different works about returning, right? Why to the land of Israel? Well, the biblical land, right? That Jews, all the Jewish people saw themselves as exiled from, talking about in their prayers, right? Okay. Mid-1890s, a man named Theodor Herzl, who didn't know these writings that people were already doing and these people already returning to the land, but this man named Theodor Herzl had a nice 19th century beard.
It's nice 2023 beard, actually.
Yeah, now, yeah, he could definitely live in Brooklyn today. Okay.
Does it work?
Theodor Herzl was a journalist born in Budapest in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, working for one of the most popular papers out of Vienna. He spoke German, he didn't speak Yiddish, right? He went to university. He was a celebrated playwright and writer, a great, wit of the age, right? He was covering the Dreyfus. The Dreyfus trial in Paris. Saw people chanting "Death to the Jews," and he said he came to the realization that I'm turning this. This is the story. Came to the realization. He writes about it in his diaries too, though, that emancipation failed.
Did
What?
he see himself as a Jew?
Oh, for sure. He saw himself as a Jew, but he saw himself as a European too. Right? A European. Emancipation failed. And what do we have to do? Create a Jewish state. 1896, he writes this pamphlet. Here's the English translation. Writes it in German called Der Judenstaat. Does that mean the Jewish state, or does that mean the state of the Jews? That's a scholarly argument. He writes a pamphlet laying out a blueprint of how we can create a Jewish state. So let's look at his writing. So turn to your packet. you see, it'll say page 14. I'll share with you online from my Kindle. Where this comes from is the Zionist ideas. There was a famous book written in the 50s or compiled in the 50s called The Zionist Idea. Arthur Hertzberg was an American rabbi who brought translations of a lot of Zionist writing together in this great book. People, it was a very important book. A few years ago, Gil Troy was a historian, put out an updated, he shortened a lot of the stuff from here, and then he added stuff post-state too in this, the Zionist ideas. So Theodor Herzl, okay. So let's read from The Jewish State, his pamphlet. Pamphlets were big at the time, like the Communist Manifesto was a pamphlet, things like that. Thomas Paine, but that was before, of course, but yeah. Okay. So let's study now, and then we'll ask the question, what is Zionism according to Herzl? Okay. Again, he didn't come up with this name, but he set up the institutions that became Zionism. Okay. So someone like to read. Matthew. You see where it says the Jewish state, the idea.
The Jewish state, 1896. The idea which I have developed in this pamphlet is an ancient one. It is the restoration of the Jewish state.
Okay, stop. What is a state? What is a state?
Place.
A place? Okay, so in America, when we say state, it means like a unit within the larger country. But
It isn't geographic, really.
Right. But a state could mean, sorry, Matthew, what do you think?
A combination of government and land.
Right, a combination, define borders with a government, right? Yeah. So in America, we call that a country, but everywhere else they call it a state, right? Okay, maybe though. Did Herzl mean an independent state? That's an argument. He might have been thinking within a larger empire, but yes, some kind of borders with autonomy or government autonomy, yeah, okay. A Jewish state. The rest, notice how it says restoration. When did we have a Jewish state? Biblical times, under the kings, right? When else do we have a Jewish state? I'm pointing to the menorah here.
Yeah.
In the Greek, for
80 years during the Hasmoneans.
Right.
That was it, 80 years, or maybe it was 70, something like that.
For Antiochus.
And that was it. Right? And then after the Hasmoneans, the Romans took over and they lost independence, and then they were totally destroyed, right? Even lost autonomy for a while, right? Okay. 2,000 years ago.
Continue?
Yeah.
The world denounces the Jews resoundingly, thus reawakening this once dormant idea. The decisive factor is our propelling force. And what is that force? The plight of the Jews. The world needs the Jewish state. Therefore, it will come to be. The Jewish question still exists. It would be foolish to deny it.
Okay, the world needs the Jewish state. Why would the world need the Jewish state? What is he thinking? Why does the world need the Jewish state? Let's think about it.
Because he wants all the Jews in one place.
Well, because they want to get rid of us.
Exactly.
The Europeans want to get rid of us. This will be great for them.
So it's not what some of the cultural Zionists would say.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It's
Hold your thoughts.
a nonsense, yeah.
But they also might say that they don't know how to treat the Jews because the Jews are so different than other people.
Right, but Herzl was saying we're not different than anybody anymore.
So, but then
But-
they were landless people in some sense. They didn't have a homeland that was theirs.
Right. So he'll see
Like the Roma, like the Gypsies.
Right.
they were suspicious.
Right.
They
But-
wanted the Jewish state so they could take.
but he's giving in, but what I'm trying to push against, he's giving into the anti-Semites.
Yes, but what is his definition? What is his definition of a Jewish state?
We'll see.
Okay,
Okay, keep going, man.
Here's one thing.
But sorry,
It's, you said they're stateless. From what you said, Rabbi, I think you're right. What I took is that prior to emancipation and during the medieval period, no one had state.
no, it has. There was no such thing as states. There was no states until the 19th.
Citizens, yeah, it was only 1789.
Right, but even the more so, like during this time in the 19th century, where there's this romantic
course,
nationalism,
yeah.
where we have a language, we have a
Yeah.
culture, and we have borders now, and things like that, right? But Jews don't.
Jews don't.
Why are Jews in Europe? Because we got kicked out of our state, right? That's the idea. We got kicked out
So
of
you
our state.
say, when you say he's giving in to the anti-Semites.
Yes. Why can't we live here? Shouldn't we ask that? Why can't we live? I speak German. I'm an educated man. You read my columns in the newspaper. Why can't I live here? He's giving in to them, I think. But at the same time, he's going to empower the idea to.
So he's saying, okay, you win, we'll go,
Not exactly, maybe,
kind of.
kind of. I think so. But kind of. Keep going, Matthew.
I think the Jewish question is more than a social or religious one, notwithstanding that it sometimes takes these and other forms. It is a national question which can only be resolved by making it a political world question to be discussed and settled by the civilized nations of the world in council.
All right. This is before the United Nations. This is before the League of Nations, right? But they don't want us, but we need that. We need them to.
Deputize this idea.
Yeah, we need them on board with this because they run the world, right? He's thinking of the Austrian emperor, the Prussian Kaiser, the King of England, right? And France was always chaotic at the time. What?
Napoleonic concert of nations.
Right, yeah.
Thinking about that.
How he's thinking, right? He's thinking of like the Peace of Westphalia type stuff. Yeah. And so, yeah, for sure. Yeah. But we need to be a part of that. He's saying we are a people like they are a people. So we need borders like they have borders so that we can be part of this. I think he's saying that, right? This is the beginning of what's called political Zionism. Herzl, for the rest of his life, he died at like 44.
Oh, God.
Yeah. This movement killed him and drove his family apart and stuff like that. But I mean, he died of a heart attack or something like that. But like he, day and night from this point on, this was his mission. And he would set up meetings with diplomats to talk about this. He was not that successful, but he did plant the seeds. Okay. But we are a people, one people. Did you read that, Matthew?
No.
Not yet. So the next line, we are a people, one people. This whole idea of Judaism as, I'm a German of Jewish religion. They won't let us be that, right? Okay, sorry. Someone had their head up. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, is this only for the European part?
So good. So now here's the critique. The European Jews don't think much of the Middle Eastern Jews because they don't really know much about them. First of all, there were way more European Jews. 90% of Jews, I think, before the Holocaust were Ashkenazi. Something huge. It was like 90%. So by this point, 1 million of them are living in America. He's not thinking about them either. Zionists have a weird time with America. The early Zionists had a weird time with America, right? Are they thinking about the Middle Eastern Jews? I don't know, kind of, but like they're not on the radar probably. And that's a big problem when Middle Eastern Jews start really coming to Israel. They never really knew how to
Well,
deal with it.
there was the fact that they were Semitic and they looked at, but also the color of their skin.
Yeah, but that wasn't everybody. Like I don't know.
Wasn't
It
that an
was
issue
more about
among
it was more
Europeans?
about where we have a European culture. I read Tolstoy and things like that, and you're from some backwater in the East, right? That was more of it. Yeah. Okay. So keep going.
Yeah, the next line is just cut off.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'll read where did I cut it off? We have honestly endeavored everywhere to merge ourselves into the social life. Is that enough?
Yeah, of surrounding.
Of surrounding community and to preserve the faith of our fathers. We are not permitted to do so. In vain, we are loyal patriots. Our loyalty in some places running to extremes. In vain do we make the same sacrifices of life and property as our fellow citizens. In vain do we strive to increase the fame of our native land in science and art, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In countries where we have lived for centuries, we are still denounced as strangers, and often by those whose ancestors were not yet domiciled in the lands where Jews had already started suffering.
Jews lived in Germany before the people who call themselves Germans migrated there, right? You know, and so, okay. We tried this emancipation thing and you didn't let us, okay? Now, let's talk about some anti-Zionism now. Okay.
I have a question. In this first thing that we read.
Yeah.
Does the term Zionist?
Yeah.
Mean a homeland for Jews?
It might.
Does it imply that it has to be in Israel? Because.
It might. We'll see. I'll talk about that.
Because one thing that.
Don't get triggered.
Okay.
Sorry. Don't get triggered.
Stop thinking so fast.
Okay.
Wait. Okay, Bob's online. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, I just had a question. What we just read, couldn't this just be a similar parody to Black Lives in America after emancipation?
Yeah.
They were emancipated on paper, but reality was a different story.
For sure. Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure a historian would know if Herzl read Frederick Douglass and people like that, but yeah, for sure. I mean, in the 19th century, there was a movement for emancipated Black slaves to create an independent country in Africa.
That's how
They did, Liberia,
Yeah,
right?
Liberia,
Yeah.
which is a word for freedom. Yes.
Right. So I'm sure Herzl knew about that, right? Knew about Liberia. Now, let's talk a little bit about anti-Zionism. Who would be against this idea in the Jewish community?
People living around.
People living in the Jewish community. Who would be against this idea?
Very successful.
The ultra-Orthodox. Why are they all? No, it was actually most of the Orthodox. Most of the Orthodox. Why are the Orthodox against this idea?
You're not supposed to live in Israel until the Messiah.
You're not supposed to. There's an idea in Jewish thought that you're not from Talmudic times that you're not supposed to go en masse to Israel and without the Messiah. Herzl is creating a secular messianist movement, if you will, right? Okay. What other Jews would be against this?
Very successful Jews.
Sorry, who said that?
The very successful Jews. Jews are doing really well.
Jews who are very well. The
Right.
upper bourgeois Jews. This is going to screw up my whole deal I got here. We have a whole movement of Jews who say, "You're right, we're not loyal here anymore. See you later." Right? Okay, good. Who else? Another religious group.
Socialists?
Well, so okay, good. We'll talk about that. So another religious group, the Reform Jews in Europe, were against this too, because they felt that no, we just have to try harder with emancipation, right? Okay, and that was also the rich Jews.
And
We have to try.
assimilation.
Not assimilation, emancipation. We're not assimilating. We're still Jews. We're acculturating. We just have to prove that we are the good citizens that we are, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, socialists, good. So why are socialists against this? Because socialists don't believe in countries, don't believe in borders, right? Marx, or there should be we have class consciousness. The borders are put up by the capitalists to oppress us.
And they will also even say identities such as Jewish would not be.
Maybe,
Yeah.
right. You might start with an ethnic identity first and then overcome that after the revolution, but yeah, exactly. Okay, good. All right, shall we keep going with Herzl?
Wasn't there conflict between the Bund in?
Yeah.
I read something about this.
So the Bund was a socialist movement of
Zionist.
Jews
So
in
were they-
Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
They were not Zionists.
But they were kind of.
They
against-
believed that Jews could have socialist autonomy within Eastern Europe.
And they weren't anti-Zionist.
They were anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reform movement in America and in Europe was anti-Zionist. Okay, in fact, Herzl, after this writing this pamphlet, he started setting up organizations like the World Zionist Congress. The first Congress was going to be, I forgot, I should have looked up, was going to be in a country in Germany, or in a city in Germany, and the Orthodox and Reform came together to keep them from going there because they were both, for different reasons, against Zionism. So they went to Basel, Switzerland instead. Right? You look it up when you get home. Famous picture of Herzl in Basel, Switzerland, overlooking a balcony. Looking out. This, great picture. Okay. Someone else pick up. No human being.
No human being is wealthy or powerful enough to transplant a nation from one habitat to another. An idea alone can achieve that, and this idea of a state may have the requisite power to do so. Jews have dreamt this kingly dream all through the long nights of their history. Next year in Jerusalem is our old phrase. It is now a question of showing that the dream can be converted into a living reality. Everything tends, in fact, to one and the same conclusion, which is clearly enunciated in the classic Berlin phrase, Juden raus, out with the Jews. I shall now put the question in the briefest possible form. Are we to get out now, and where to? Or may we yet remain, and how long? We are one people. Our enemies have made us one without our consent. As repeatedly happens in history, distress binds us together, and thus united, we suddenly discover our strength. Yes, we are strong enough to form a state, and indeed a model state. We possess all human and material resources necessary for the purpose.
It's not model state. So Herzl wrote a novel called, in German, it's called Old Neuland, which means old new land. And when it was translated into Hebrew, it was translated as Tel Aviv. This was before the city was founded, because Tel is an ancient hill, is a hill in the land that was where a city once stood, but it was conquered and conquered and conquered, and eventually it was just a mound. Tel, so something ancient, and Aviv is spring, right? So here's an English translation, Old Neuland. It's a futuristic novel where 50 years in the future, someone is traveling to this Jewish state and seen it as the model democracy. Okay. Yeah. Keep reading. Let sovereignty
be granted us over a portion of the globe large enough to satisfy the rightful requirements of a nation. The rest we shall manage for
A
ourselves.
portion of the globe.
Let's think big.
Right. So, well, but it doesn't say the land of Israel. He will say in a second, yes, the land of Israel. He said Palestine, we'll call them, right? But in one of the early Zionist congresses, there was a proposal that the British government would give Zionist land in what's today Kenya, but it was called Uganda. It's called the Uganda Plan. And Herzl was for it, and then he was against it because he saw all the Eastern European Jews were against it. That's where most of the Zionists came from, was Eastern Europe. It had to have been the land of Israel.
Wasn't there some offer from the Chinese at the time to also put?
That I don't know of, but there was a city in China that a lot of Jews moved to because they were working for the Russian railroad that was building the railroad to this town in China. That may be what you're thinking of.
Okay.
Far been.
Yeah.
Northern part.
Yeah. Keep going, please.
The creation of a new state is neither ridiculous nor impossible. We have in our day witnessed the process in connection with nations which were not largely members of the middle class, but poorer, less educated, and consequently weaker than ourselves. The governments of all countries blighted by anti-Semitism will be keenly interested in assisting us to obtain the sovereignty we want. Palestine is our ever memorable historic home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. Here it is, fellow Jews, neither fable nor deception. Therefore, I believe that a wonderful generation of Jews will spring into existence. The Maccabees will rise again.
That's why I wanted tonight to be, that line is why I wanted to do this during the Hanukkah.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm just curious that when he wrote this.
Yeah.
What was then Palestine.
Yeah. Was a province of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Yeah.
So did he in his writings discuss exactly how this land was going to be given to them?
Yes. So if you read the whole, this is just a small snippet. He talks about setting up committees and setting up organizations and raising money and talking to the great powers, right? I think he'd try to get him a meeting with the Ottoman Sultan and say, hey, let us live here. We'll develop the country. We'll be good for the inhabitants.
Because there were also Arabs living
They were.
Yeah.
Yes. So do not let anybody tell you that there's no such thing as Palestinians. Palestinians are living in Palestine, right? It was a province of the Ottoman Empire, right? It was not an independent country, right? The Ottoman Empire stretched from Turkey through North Africa and into Europe too, right?
At that time, they were just Arabs.
Right. So right. So yes, but they're Palestinian Arabs, right? And so, as a European, he didn't really care about what they thought, the people living there.
That's good.
He didn't really ask their permission. He asked the permission of the powers, right? And so at this time and after Herzl, Jews started buying up land in Palestine, right? But a lot of the land was owned by absentee landlords with peasants living on it, right? And so Jews would buy up land from the landlords who might have been living in Beirut or Damascus or Alexandria or wherever, right? And then they would go and kick off the peasants living on the land, right? That happened, right? At this time, that's how the Zionist movement. We're going to build a base, but we're going to bring Jews back to farming too, which we'll see from another writer.
Herzl himself, was he known to be an incredibly charismatic, charming individual?
Yes.
That he was able to pull this kind of thing off?
Yes. Yes, he was a very charismatic person. And there's a professor my wife studied with the University of Toronto who's now at Harvard, Derek Penslar, who wrote a book about Herzl and charisma. Yeah. Okay.
Let me finish it
Yeah,
up.
let's. I didn't think it would take us that long with Herzl, but it's very important. So good.
Let me repeat once more my opening words. The Jews who wish for a state will have it. We shall live at last as free people on our own soil and die peacefully in our own homes, or not so peacefully. The world will be liberated by our freedom, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness. And whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity.
Right. We're going to create a model. We're going to create a model, right? He felt, okay.
This is also why the world needs us too. It's not just
they need us because
we're gonna be
we
a light unto nations.
We're good people,
and we're gonna be a light unto nations.
That's also why they did them.
Well, so maybe, perhaps, yeah. Okay, we're going to be like, so he's bringing a prophetic idea but he's secularizing it. But we're a light of the nations. That's what
the world needs us because we developed the basic underpinnings from which all the other European religions and faiths and everything were developed.
Yes,
including Islam, by the way.
He's talking about science and industry, though.
But
Right?
he's also saying they need us because they have a problem with how to govern Jews. We can govern ourselves, and we're going to solve their problem. We're going to solve their problem, and it'll be good for them. One, because it'll get rid of their problem, and two, because we'll add to the world. Right? It's a liberal idea. That liberal meaning, like a little bit of capitalism in there, right? Yeah. But it's always been that the world needs Jews.
Sure.
We had the trade routes, we had the money to lend.
Because that's the only thing we were allowed
to do. Right.
Right,
Okay,
but
good.
needed.
So let's critique Herzl. Let's critique Herzl.
So with Herzl, did he identify? He uses the word Jew.
Yeah. But
Jew, in my interpretation, could be anyone who identifies themselves as being Jewish. He's not.
You wouldn't have. Yeah, but at that time, you wouldn't have identified yourself as being Jewish unless you were. And first of all, you were told you were Jewish by the government too, right?
Right.
And not in America. In America, the government's not allowed to know, your background. But in Europe, it would say it on your, in your tax form, right? Yeah, you were a Jew, right? And in Russia, it would say it on your passport, right? I read about this recently. There was a big controversy in the States that they were signing some treaty with Russia in the early 20th century, and the Jewish community was trying to lobby against it because the Russian government wanted the American government to say if there were American citizens visiting Russia, to say if they were Jews, and the Americans were going to sign that treaty, so it was they knew you were Jew. There was not. The only way for intermarriage was if you converted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not the only way, but by the 20th century, more and more. But yeah, okay. So
They wouldn't have a rabbi would not ask a question at the beginning of a class like you did, what is a Jew? You knew.
You knew, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Whether you were practicing or not, whether you had a Christmas tree or not, right? And Herzl may have had a Christmas tree, right? Okay. Good.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So you asked the question like, about critiquing Herzl.
Yeah.
And I think one critique is that he's envisioning returning to a land that's already inhabited by other people.
Yes, 100%. Already inhabited. So he did think like a European
Colonist.
Let's say imperialist. Imperialist in that this is a colony of a big empire. Herzl lived in a big empire, right? He lived in a big multi-ethnic empire. And the Ottomans were also a multi-ethnic empire. And he thought maybe they would carve out a space for them, or he kind of knew that the Ottoman Empire was falling apart, and maybe some European king would take over parts of the Ottoman Empire, which happened after World War I, right? Remember, the British took over and the French took over, right? And so he was hedging his bets with European leaders too.
But at this time,
yeah,
Palestine,
yeah,
was fairly sparsely populated.
Yeah, it was.
I like my memory of the book that I'm reading is that it was under 500,000 people.
Yeah, it was sparsely populated, and someone like Herzl would have thought in an imperialist way, we'll come, we European Jews will come, and it'll be good for everybody because we'll have better agriculture and we'll set up industries and things like that, and then the population will bloom.
Because the negative term of being a colonist is basically around taking over, which wasn't necessarily true in this case.
Right. So
there was enough land where actually there was nobody living on.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's not
right.
but
it is still, and we cannot say it was not.
That's right.
It was still people from somewhere else moving there, right? Now, colony, this is not the French in Algeria, right? And especially after World War II, after the beginning, Jews in Europe after World War II especially had no place to return to. Right. The French in Algeria went back to France, right? Now, they'd been in Algeria for 100 years, but they went back to France, right? The Jews did not have a home because the Europeans did not want them, and Herzl knew that. And so he saw himself, so it was a colony, he used the word colonist and colony in that we're going to somewhere else and setting up settlements. But he did not see himself as a colony in that the British in India, that we're going to take the gold and diamonds.
It's more like the British buying New York.
Yeah. This is more like the Pilgrims coming to Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, because they really are intruding.
They were intruding, but yeah.
He wants to buy the land. So he wants the okay from the Ottoman Empire.
He wants to
settle in this area.
Yeah. Or work through their immigration systems. Yeah.
Exactly. But Rabbi, isn't this kind of
and I'll say I'm not an anti-Zionist, don't worry. But I'm trying to get us to critique our own story, to look into it, right? Because it's important to be nuanced. It's important to be nuanced, right? So first Ken, then Bob, then Barbara.
No, just to me, it gets back to that. There are people from somewhere else coming to a place that's already inhabited.
Yeah.
Under what conditions did they come? Were they immigrants?
No.
Were they refugees? Certainly some were. Are they colonizers? I mean, certainly.
So the people who were going, for the most part, the people who were going were Jews from Eastern Europe. Now, were those people refugees? Kind of.
After World War II,
no, well, before World War II. In the 1890s, the 1910s, were they refugees? Kind of, in that they were fleeing pogroms, they were fleeing dire poverty, like Guatemalans.
I was going to say that's the analogy. The Guatemalans coming to the States is I think a good analogy, which many people on the left don't like.
Yeah,
when that's brought up because
right.
But
So the Ottomans probably did not have a complex system of immigration. I mean, maybe they did. Like they knew where people, but they were kind of refugees. I mean, there wasn't the term refugee at the time in the same way, right? There was no legal status refugee at the time, right? And so they kind of were refugees.
Some weren't, and probably some weren't.
Some were going for opportunity, right? And
so there really wasn't the process.
So I'll say this: where our grandparents Were our grandparents who came here in the late 19th, early 20th century, were they refugees? Well, not really, because yes, kind of, they were fleeing Europe, but also there was open immigration here. You didn't have to be a refugee. You just had to, you had to be able to read in your language and have $20 or something like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that was open immigration. So
And
we're-
in the European countries
Mhm.
that Herzl was really sort of
Yeah.
using as his framework, if you will.
Mhm.
Was there such a thing as if you moved from one of the French area to the where you became a citizen of another country?
it
I
was-
don't think so.
no,
I
not
think you
really.
had to be born.
Yeah, you couldn't
If you
really,
were born in that
there
country.
were not really immigrant, like people, you know, they were Americans in Paris, as we say, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
eventually
didn't
you,
become
I
a
think
citizen.
eventually you could have, but like, it was not the same way as you are today, right? So, yeah,
Right.
Barbara. Oh, sorry, Bob. I think Bob was next. Barbara, go ahead, Barb. Go ahead.
So, but wasn't there a way in which lots of other people?
He said Bob.
Oh, yeah,
That land.
Yeah.
And from the time of the
Yeah.
Crusades.
yeah. Oh, for sure.
You know,
For
there's,
sure.
you know, I was driving around Israel last year and there was a German colony.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the German? Here, I'll explain. The German colony there's a German colony in Tel Aviv. There's a German colony in Haifa. There's a German colony in Jerusalem.
Right.
It's because they were German-speaking Christians who wanted to set up a colony. That's
Right.
it. Yeah,
And there
Mhm.
were pre-colonies,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there's,
mhm.
you know, there's different quarters in Jerusalem that have been lived
Yeah,
in for
yeah,
many years by
yeah.
different peoples.
right. And sorry to interrupt. And I will say though, Jews have always lived in the land of Israel. There has always been a Jewish presence, and by the late 19th century, the majority of people in Jerusalem were Jews. Not in the rest of the country, but in the majority of people in Jerusalem were Jews.
So there, I mean, it seems to me there was kind of this sense that the land was open or that the Ottomans were willing to let people, or they took it over. I mean,
Yeah,
there's something.
yeah. Right. So right. Yeah. So good. It's very different. So we cannot use our modern language can help us, but it is not exact, right? And so immigration, refugees, colonization, it's all mixed together a little bit, right?
I would say one more point about it. It's just that regardless of what label you want to give to those people.
Yeah, there were people living there.
There were people living there, and most of my experience, whether it's towns in America or towns on the border, when groups come in, the groups there tend not to like it.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's just, you know, if you want to call it gentrification, people
Right,
like gentrification, people like whatever the reason is, they
Right.
typically don't
I
like
mean,
it. So
I think immigration is great for the country, but like, you know, I can understand why someone living in a small town in Iowa feels threatened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think, you know, in today's parable to, you know, Israel, we have Jews who bought up properties in Lakewood, New Jersey, and have taken over.
Taken over. I mean, that's a loaded term. That's a loaded term.
yeah, they don't, people don't.
And they're, or in Muncie or wherever. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
So good. Okay. We've read Herzl. We've read a little bit of Herzl. Yeah, I have homework to read more. You know, let's read a little bit. So now Herzl created institutions. He created the World Zionist Congress, that they would come together and debate these ideas. He created what became the Jewish National Fund, which would raise money to buy land. He created, you know, organizations that would send people to live there to farm the land. And created newspapers to spread the ideas, right, and journals. Right, he was really an institution builder, but he was also talking to the great powers that be. That's why that's political Zionism, right? We need the world support, right? Let's talk about other flavors of Zionism. Okay, let's talk about labor. All right.
51.
Yeah, right. So we're going to read a guy named Aleph Dalet Gordon. Okay, or in English A.D. Gordon, but Aleph Dalet Gordon. I think it was Aharon David. I think was his name, right? So Gordon was a guy from the Russian Empire. He got inspired by the idea of going back to the land and becoming a farmer. And he moved to the land as an old man. He was in his 40s. But most of the people moving to the land in the early 20th century were 18, 19, 20. He became their inspiration. He became their ideologue. And he wrote these beautiful, beautiful essays about labor. Okay. And what does labor
Where in
need?
Europe was he from?
From the Russian Empire. I forgot what town he's from.
Because
I
I'm
can look it-
wondering where the name, how the
Gor-
name
where
Gordon
does-
evolved.
Gordon's a common Jewish name because it had to do with someone from Grodno, which is a town in Lithuania.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's not the, it's not the Scottish name Gordon. It comes someone from Grodno, which is a town in Lithuania.
Interesting.
But it's associated with the Jewish community.
There might be non-Jews with that name too, I don't know, but when you see a Jew with the last name Gordon, it's probably, because they were somewhere hundreds of years ago, they're from Lithuania, right? Okay, or what's that? Good, so what's this idea of labor? This is one of the flavors of Zionism.
I
one
have
of the
stuff in the
ideologies.
kitchen I have to take care of.
Oh, good. So Jews in Central Europe and Eastern Europe couldn't own land, right? Until emancipation, they couldn't own land, so they didn't work the soil. And a romantic idea of nationalism at the time is we are tied to the soil. It's the salt of the earth. The peasant is the ideal, right? Okay, and it was the anti-Semitic stereotype was that you people who are just merchants are not producing anything. You're only selling the things that the real people, that's what populists say, the real people, who are the real Americans, right? The real people are the ones who work with their hands, right? So what do Jews have to do in our land? We have to work with our hands.
Make it our own by working the land.
Working the land, right? Like our biblical ancestors were farmers and shepherds, artisans, right? Okay. So Alfred Gordon, who was a well-off guy, I think his family owned a mill, he was a middle-class guy. He, through reading and stuff, he threw off his orthodoxy and decided to move to the land, right? This becomes labor is the new religion, right? Okay.
Jeffersonian.
Yes, but more socialist.
But does he still
Social.
want to stay as
Jeffersonian
well?
did not
What?
work.
Does he still want to
Jefferson did not work
stay?
the land.
Did he want to stay?
Also
Okay, good,
political-
good. So the labor Zionists, where Ben Gurion, the first prime minister, came from, did they want a state? At the beginning, there was a debate. Do we need a state? Or first we need to work the land and eventually a state will come. We need to create the right kind of person for a state. That was definitely an idea. We need to create the Jewish proletariat, a new Jew who has a hoe and a sickle and muscles and who's suntanned, who's also a woman, right? Right? Socialism was very much part of this, but an ethnic social, a nationalistic socialism, not a universal socialism, or at least they felt we'll have the socialist revolution here in our country, that will spread, right? Okay. That's the idea too. You understand? So the socialist Zionists, the labor Zionists felt that we need to create these communities first before we have a state. We need to have the right kind of people living there. And that's where kibbutzim grew out of that idea.
Rabbi, you made the point earlier about how the Jews who bought land through the workers who were thereof.
Yeah.
But that was part of their whole cultural thing, was that they didn't want to have other people work.
Good.
They didn't throw them off in a sinister, like maybe some of they threw them off in a sinister way. They didn't do that. They threw them off because they felt they had to work the
So
land.
good.
They were very opposed to be viewed as people who hired poor Arabs to work the land for them, right?
Right. So the original colonies before Herzl were started by the Rothschilds, bought up land and Jews moved there. There were cities, if you've been to Zichron Yaakov, Petach Tikva, there's some Rishon LeZion. These were these new towns there's a couple others that were built in the 1880s. Jews went there to farm, but eventually they weren't making it and they were hiring people to help them out too, right? And so the new people started coming in the early 20th century, who formed the kibbutzim, the moshavim. They believed in Hebrew labor. which means we're not gonna hire non-Jews. Right. Now, no outsourcing. And I have this great poster at home that you can buy, the old Zionist posters, and this poster has this big watermelon on it. And it was an advertisement for an agriculture co-op, right? And it says Avatiach Ivri, Hebrew watermelon, right? We are going to create Jewish labor.
But even I was in Israel in the 80s. I
Yeah.
worked on a kibbutz,
Yeah.
and I will tell you, it wasn't all Jewish labor.
No,
I mean,
no.
I was one of the only Jewish
Yeah,
volunteers,
yeah. By the
and just in the 80s.
by the
Yeah.
70s, the whole system
The
fell
whole,
apart.
by the 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
There
Yes.
was no
Why
Jewish
why were Thai and Nepalese people kidnapped and killed into Gaza? Why?
They were working.
They were working on kibbutzim. Because not enough Jews want to work in agriculture. Used to be Palestinians who worked in agriculture, and since the early 2000s, kibbutzim wouldn't hire Palestinians, and then Gaza wouldn't let them in, for various reasons, and so people from Thailand especially come to Israel to work.
Right.
Okay, so let's read Al Gordon. So let's read this one called People in Labor. It's short.
Do you want me to read it?
Please go
or
ahead.
you want me to
Please,
read it?
Beth, go ahead.
You want me to? Please. The Jewish people has been completely cut off from nature and imprisoned within city walls these 2,000 years. We have become accustomed to every form of life, except to a life of labor done at our own behest and for our own sake. It will require the greatest effort of will for such people to become normal again.
Normal. Stop.
Interesting.
Normal. Hold on. What does normal mean? Now, Gordon wrote this in Hebrew too, right? Writing in Hebrew. Well, we're not going to get time tonight to talk about cultural Zionism, but the revival of Hebrew becomes very important. Herzl thought Jews would speak German, or whatever language they already spoke, but Hebrew became very important. But what does normal mean? Matthew.
Commonly socially accepted.
That's what Herzl was going for.
Does he have
Okay.
Shifts between.
Normal.
kind of a Marxist? It's kind of a Marxist, he obviously, I think he's probably a Marxist or socialist. He has about the proletariat, about labor being so crucial to
The real people.
Yeah,
We're going to be the real people.
Yeah.
Jews were middlemen. He's buying into the anti-Semitic critique.
It's like a trope, yeah.
Yeah, it's a trope, but he's romanticizing what we Jews used to be, right? He's buying into the anti-Semitic critique, but he's like the normal meaning. I'll say this: Ben Gurion. So Herzl also wanted a normal state, right? Jews to be normal, like we are outcasts. We're not normal, right? And so Ben Gurion, I don't know if it's Ben Gurion, someone in the early state said, "Well, know that Israel's normal when you have Jewish taxi cab drivers and Jewish prostitutes. We're normal, right?" But now let's give a religious critique. Jews are not supposed to be normal. Jews are supposed to be prophetic, right? Okay, or we were saying we were just buying into what the anti-Semites believe, or right. Hermann Cohen, who was a German Jewish thinker who was against Zionism, said those fools want to be normal. Jews are not supposed to be normal. Right? We have a mission in the world. Part of Zionism was we're just going to be like everybody else off in a corner in the Middle East, and they won't bother us anymore. Right?
Well, the sentence that I was just reading does seem to sort of, it sets labor off as a sort of a separate thing that at our own, on our own behest or for its own sake. I mean, it's not part of what you do.
Yeah.
It's a separate entity.
Labor becomes a religion, right? The labor, becomes the crucial what it means to be a human, right? Good.
That's a very Marxist. I mean, that was a very popular thought at the time. So he's not inventing that.
No. He's translating into Hebrew. Yeah.
Well, Marx and Engels were both Jews.
No, Engels was not.
Engels was not. Marx was.
And Marx may have been,
but
or didn't really like Jews. Marx was Marx was an anti-Semite as a Jew.
Yeah, yeah, no. I
Okay,
get that.
well, here, I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. What are we seeking? I'm gonna read just because I want to get through, I don't want to keep you here all night, but are we all okay? We're good with this? Okay, what are we seeking in Palestine? You see that part?
Where are we?
Yeah.
52. Sorry.
On the top of 52. Yeah, what are
Oh,
we?
I see it, yeah.
What are we seeking in Palestine? Is it not that which we can never find elsewhere, the fresh milk of a healthy people's culture? What we are come to create at present is not the culture of the academy, not those Jews in Central Europe who go to college, go to university, before we have anything else, but a culture of life, of which the culture of the academy is only one element. We'll build a university later, right? We seek to create a vital culture out of which the cream of a higher culture can easily be evolved. We intend to create creeds and ideologies, art and poetry, and ethics and religion, all growing out of a healthy life and intimately related to it. What's this healthy life? Life of labor. We're going to be physical. We shall therefore have created healthy human relationships and living links that bind the present to the past. What we seek to create here is life, our own life, in our own spirit and in our own way. Also, like the idea at the time of that was like cities make you go crazy, right? That and being out in nature is what makes you sane, right? I mean, we have that idea a little bit today that going on a walk is good for you, right? But like, city, there's mental illness in nature too. Okay. We need a new spirit for our national renaissance. The new spirit must be created here in Palestine. It must be nourished by our life in Palestine. It must be vital in all its aspects, and it must be our own. What we need is zealots of labor, zealots in the finest sense of the word. Okay, so that's just a little
It must be all our own, which I think is an interesting.
Yeah. Now I want to give you also, the book, this book, the original Zionist idea, is filled with just men. This one, most of it is just men, but I want to. Gil Troy does put in women, some women. So Rachel, was a poet of the early, made aliyah between going up to the land, immigrating to the country. One of the early aliyot. She's buried in the kibbutz Kinneret, one of the first kibbutzim. She was a poet of the early pioneers, they called themselves, right? So I want to read this religion of labor in her poetry, right? And in Hebrew, she was called Rachel HaMishoreret, Rachel the poet, right? I have not sung you, my country. You see where I am? It's on 755. Nor brought glory to your name with the great deeds of a hero or the spoils of a battle yields. But on the shores of the Jordan, my hands have planted a tree. My feet have made a pathway through your fields. Modest are the gifts I bring you. I know this mother. Whose mother? Fear. It's kind of pagan. Right? And I'm saying that on purpose, right? It doesn't sound Jewish, but it's in Hebrew. Modest, I know the offerings of your daughter. Only an outburst of song on a day when the light flares up. Only a silent tear for your poverty. Right? She's turning labor into a religious poem, right? Like the earth into the God, if you will, right?
And poverty because it's failing, it was failing.
Yeah, because now the critique, they don't see the other people working the land. Yeah. They see the swamps of she's living in the Galilee. They see the swamps of the Hula Valley and things like that they need to drain.
Right.
They didn't know that, you need a
It was a mess.
They saw it as a mess because there was malaria there and we could come and civilize it. Right? Very colonist. Draining the swamps, which they made farmland for them, but it hurt the environment. Right? But yeah, there was malaria there. And they didn't, and the other people were working the land too. So, yeah.
Rabbi, would you forward that handout in the email or?
I can do that. Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So, since I don't want to keep you all night, we didn't get to Ochada, which you could read at home, which he was one of the revivers of Hebrew and said, if the labor Zionists said we need to create labor before we have a state, Haram said we need to create a culture before we have a state, right? Herzl said, no, we just need a state and the rest will follow. I brought here also Jabotinsky, which I definitely want to read Jabotinsky next time, because he said we need to bring people, but we also need to create military might and the rest will follow.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and we'll see that. Or do you want to stick around? We could read Jabotinsky.
Well, there's an interesting thing, which I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but that one of the issues in Israel is that as you know, everybody knows, it's a requirement that everybody must join the military.
Yeah.
But the ultra-Orthodox in Israel do not, and there is a real movement now in Israel that no, if you want to be a citizen, you have to, you can't just sit around and think all day.
Well, right. I mean, that's a 75-year debate, right?
Yeah,
And we'll talk
but
about that.
whole idea of actively participating physically as well as,
Well, for sure. Yeah.
you know, is
So-
a,
Right. So Gordon was writing also against the Jews who lived in the cities in Palestine who studied, who relied on tzedakah. Right. So I want to wrap up. So next time I want to continue to get to your questions. I still want to study the old Zionist thinkers because it will help us think about Israel today, right? And we'll talk about Israel today next week. But so next week we'll do a little bit of Haram, we'll do Jabotinsky, which is where the Likud party comes from. Yeah. Good. But I'll record. Take this and I'll give you whatever I print out for next week too.
Thank you.
But before we go, questions? Any questions?
I think this is really interesting.
Good.
Give us-
And we haven't even gotten to the founding of the state yet. Also, next week I want to read the Declaration of Independence, which is very important. Yeah, Lisa.
I don't know what we decided to do.
What is a Jew? Good. So good. Before we leave, I'll give a working definition of a Jew, and then a working definition of Zionism. Okay. Good. So what is a Jew? Well, a Jew is more than someone who has a certain religion, right? And a Jew is also more than someone who has a certain genetics. But it is being part of, which is a little circular, being part of the Jewish people, right? So actually, before I leave, I forgot one more thing I want to do, because as I said, the Reform movement was against Zionism at the beginning, because it said they wanted to get rid of the Jewish people idea, and we are people of a Jewish religion, right? But we can't get rid of that. That's essential to the religion. And I would say, as a religious person, the religion is essential to the people, but not everybody agrees with me on that. But what is a Jew? A Jew is someone who's part of the Jewish people. It's a little bit of a circular definition.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
It was an interesting thing in the
Right,
very
but-
first sentence or
Yeah.
something of the
Yeah.
Herzl thing.
We're one
Where-
people, yeah.
Well, where he refers to the Jewish people, but he uses a singular verb.
Yeah.
The people is, not the people are.
Right.
Which is
Right, well,
interesting.
yeah, well, in Hebrew, am is a singular word. Am means people too. And so, but I hear this is finally, let me give a definition of Zionism. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Right? So what was Herzl wanting to be liberated from anti-Semitism in Europe, right? And
Would you say that again?
Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. I think that's the easiest, the most basic definition, and then other people have their different flavors of Zionism, but Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, which includes culture, which includes sovereignty, which includes, right?
I'm gonna write.
Might
that down.
include sovereignty.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
So it's basically
they have the right for their land, they have the right to be existing there.
Right. So that will be a question when we read the declaration next week. Okay. So, but I want to end. Sorry, So my teacher, David Ellenson, who was the president of Hebrew Union College when I entered and when I was ordained, he was a well-known scholar of modern Judaism, also a mensch and a great rabbi. He died suddenly last night. And so, I mean, he's the teacher of David Ellenson, teacher of generations of Reform rabbis, but also of just the Jewish world in America and in Israel, right? Yeah. And so I want to read something he wrote about Zionism in 2014, which comes from the book, The Zionist Ideas. So he's talking a little bit about how early Reform was against Zionism and how Zionism, or how Reform really emphasizes universal values of Judaism, and Zionism really emphasizes particularistic values, right?
What's that word?
Particularistic. Right?
Particulars, okay.
Yeah. And so I want to read what he says. Our Zionism must be built upon the dialectical foundations of universalism and particularism and the interplay between them. Both poles must be accorded religious legitimacy by our movement, for only then can a platform be constructed in which each can inform and at times provide a corrective to the other. In so doing, a new ground for our Reform Zionism will be established. We need both. We need the universalism, the big mission of the Jews to the world, even living everywhere, but also the particularism of the Jewish people as the Jewish people living as Jews in a Jewish place, right? And the interplay between them.
I think you're being kind. To me, they butt up against each other.
The butting up against each other
at the very moment.
Butting up against each other is the Jewish value.
It's a very old precept, right?
Yeah.
It's a Hillel's precept. It's
Yeah.
from not for myself, who is, and
not for me, right.
only for myself, then what am I? I mean, it's like, it's an ongoing thing. Right?
Good. So butting up and arguing and coming to a synthesis is a Jewish value, I would say. So friends, have a good night. Next week we'll meet on Tuesday. Just so because some people are good on Thursday, some people are good on Tuesday. So compromise is to do it on both nights to see. And it'll still be Hanukkah. We'll light candles. We'll talk about the the new Maccabees that Herzl wants to create. And thank you for learning with me, and keep thinking of your questions and bring them to me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, we might have sufganiyot, says Barbara. She'll come in person and you might get a sufganiyot.
I used to make them.
Thank you.